Thank you again for showing us tonight. We wanted to say hello and thank you as well to all our customers and followers streaming with us live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for always tuning in with us. So again, my name is Lizelle. I'm the customer service and sales manager here with Highland Park Lapidary. Our team is located in the Philippines. We have our stone cutting facility here in Cebu. We are the only manufacturer that cuts commercially, typically between 1 to 2 tons of rock a week in our factory in Cebu before it got shut down due to COVID. Our main factory operation is in Shenzhen, China. We are working on our second factory in Mexico, and our main warehouse operation is located in Massachusetts. And for our audience here tonight, put in the chat your name and where are you calling from. We wanted to welcome you all. Yes, Sandy, that's a lot of rocks. Florida, hi. Omaha, North Carolina, Oregon, Wyoming, Washington, Oklahoma, California, Arizona, Wisconsin, Utah. Wow. Thank you guys for coming in tonight. This is the place where we share knowledge, ask our questions, and get valuable tips and tricks all about the lapidary art. Do you agree with me? Put yes in the chat if you agree. Yes? Yes. All right. Awesome. Tonight is still all about diagnosing problems and adjustment of our slab saw. That's the topic. The same drill, you can raise your hand if you have questions by going to the reactions icon on the bottom of your Zoom and click raise hand, or you can also post your questions on the chat. Okay, everybody is all set. Get ready as we kick off tonight's Highland Park Interactive Live webinar with our guest speaker, our CEO, John Rowland, and our General Manager, Sherman Rowland. Joining us, our CEO, John Rowland, and our General Manager, Sherman Rowland. Let's kick this off. Everybody sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's Highland Park Live Interactive webinar.
Thank you, Lizelle. Let's get John and I pinned up top front there. I think whoever's running that, there's John. I'm gonna give my brother some shit here. It's like, I like your jeans hanging there on the wall.
Yeah, you like that? That's my in-house laundry dryer.
Yep.
I hang them outside, they get too dirty.
Well, it's not as dirty there now, but it's from
no, it's really, it hasn't rained much, so it's really dusty out.
Oh, it's dusty then. Yep. All right, guys, great to see everybody here. And we're super stoked to kind of get into a lot of the questions. We've also got the questions, some of the questions. I think we had some questions from last week. So guys, make sure that's up on the webinar spreadsheet so we can also pick up any of those questions that were left from last week too. So yeah, definitely. Videos wise, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's one of the things we're trying to do, is to get more people aware that this knowledge is available. We make it available for free. What we talk about really applies to anything. Obviously it works with the Highland Park, but our approach is to really help people wherever they're at. If they've got a Phantom, a Barranca, Beacon Star, whatever the machine somebody has, we want to have them be successful using it. And we try to make parts for a bunch of machines. We just got a whole bunch of Phantom parts in, moving vice jaws, vice locks. I know, John, that you just did Phantom 18 vice locks. Does that vice lock work for a 24 as well? Do you know?
I'm pretty sure it works on the 24 too.
So for any of your friends that have Phantom, like a lot of people have been stuck when they break the moving vise, we now have those in stock. We've got pretty much all the Phantom feed screws, feed nuts, replaceable inserts, all that. So we really
that whole gear mechanism and pulley drive for the back of it too.
Yeah. So we're not, our whole thing is to support people in Lapidary. And yeah, we love it if people buy stuff from us, but I'm happy. I'm just as happy if somebody gets an old machine up and going than getting a new machine. So speaking of that, John, you were going to talk about pulleys. That was one of the things that was
let me kind of start by reviewing what we talked about last week. For those of you who weren't here last week, I started by talking about the diagnosing the carriage and finding issues and using an indicator to look at the carriage and the carriage adjustment and isolate where you might have problems in the carriage or the cross feed. And then I also talked about looking at the arbor bearings. So if you haven't seen that, that is up on our YouTube channel.
Is it up on the YouTube channel, guys?
Yeah. So can somebody throw a link up for that on the chat?
Oh, hey, hi, Sal. Lori Coleman's on here. Awesome.
Yeah, I saw Lori. I thought I'd say a shout out to her.
Lori's got great material.
So
all right,
this week, what I am going to take us through is I'm going to talk very briefly. I have a little video on diagnosing pulley issues, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about the process of removing, replacing, and aligning the arbor bearings and aligning the saw. I know historically, there's a ton of voodoo about how to properly align saws, and we've broken it down into a really simple science and a method that will get perfect results every time, which that's what we want in our production. And we definitely want to help you all do that if you are servicing your saw and you're wanting to make sure that when you put your new blade on, you aren't dishing the blade, you're not causing, damage or problems because the saw isn't aligned properly. And unfortunately, we've seen that over and over again where people don't understand the proper technique for aligning, and then they'll put a new blade on their saw and they'll run it for about a week and they'll start dishing it because their alignment's off. So let's play the video on pulleys, and then I'll speak to that a little bit. And we also have a table with pulley sizes, Marikar, that we can put up after the video.
Okay. I am going to tell you a little bit more. I started thinking about other places where saws have problems. And one of the things I realized is on the old saws, so much of the time I saw that somebody had a pulley go bad and then they modify it and they grab something else out of their shop, and then their feed ratios are all wrong. So on our saws here, and I'm going to lift this belt guard off. We have the nice lift-off hinge that makes it really handy. Basically what you've got is you've got your motor pulley, arbor pulley, feed pulley, your step pulley in the front, and an idler pulley. Now I will mention while I have it apart here, sometimes when people have a noise in their saw, there'll be this noise and they'll conclude, oh, the arbor bearings are bad. In reality, it's not their arbor bearings sometimes. And if you take the feed belt off and the sound goes away, then you know it's coming from either here or these bearings up here. Now these are turning pretty slow, so usually the most likely culprit is this one right here. If the bushing gets dry, or if it's worn out and that pulley's rattling, it can sound a little bit like a main bearing. But if you take this bolt off and then run the saw just with the arbor bearings running, then you can be able to hear, is it just an arbor bearing problem, or am I dealing with something here? On the pulley sizes, we have a chart of feed rates. I'm happy to share that information with everyone. I'll put it up on the screen so you all can copy it and have it. It basically tells you blade speeds for the different size saws and the feed rates, and there's a calculation in there that will show you inches per hour. But getting the right sizes is really important, or your feed rate can be off, and it can cause you more problems because you're pushing the blade, pushing the rock into the blade too fast.
All right.
Let's pop up that chart.
Yeah, unfortunately, the chart, I didn't put feed rates in it.
Oh, we can do that later.
Just show the chart on screen, Mark. So basically what I did is, if you look at different size saws.
And you guys can take a screen picture of this, or just take a picture.
Well, there's
of
a link. There's a link there too.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. We'll give you a link.
Just put up there. But all I did is I went through for each of the different size saws, and these are pretty much accurate if you go across almost any brand, because your arbor needs to be turning for that blade size, needs to be turning at that ratio. Now, obviously, if you have a smaller pulley, on the motor, and a different size pulley in the arbor, then you basically need to do the math, which if you take, for instance, if you have a 3-inch pulley on the motor and a 3-inch pulley on the arbor, that's a ratio of 1, and you multiply it times the motor speed, then you're running at the motor speed. If you've got a smaller pulley and you divide it by the larger pulley and then multiply that times the RPM of the motor, that tells you your blade speed. So this,
why don't we actually, just to do that, because I know you did that, but maybe what we do is we show somebody just how we do that on a calculator, because that is actually really helpful. Once you understand this, you can always calculate what speed you're running if you know how to do the formula. And so I think
why don't I, rather than us do that here, Sherman, why don't I do an update? Like, I'll do an addition to this that we can post up in the same place on the website, and then I will show on a little Excel form how that calculation is done. But it's pretty straightforward. It does get a little bit more complicated when you start calculating the feed rate, because then what you're doing is you're looking at the RPM of the RPM of the front drive shaft or the back drive shaft on the Fratum, and then the gear ratio between the worm and the gear, and then the thread pitch of the feed screw. And I can show that. I have that in my table. I didn't want to start with that because a lot of people look at that and just like, it will make your head hurt. But the bottom line is that if you start by looking, like if you go to buy an old HP or old Fratum saw and you look at it and somebody's put an 8-inch pulley on the front where the feed shaft is, you can tell that that's wrong. And this gives you some guidelines so you can look at a saw and go, well, it doesn't seem like it feeds right when you look at your motor pulley and somebody's put like a 2-inch motor pulley on it. Well, it's going to be running unnaturally slow. If they put a 4-inch motor pulley, then it's going to probably be running really fast. So this gives you a guideline for that, and I can provide more information for people. And like always, if you got a problem with your saw like that, you can catch me on Facebook and throw me messages, and I'm going to help you.
Why don't you just take a minute and explain the relationship between arbor speed and diamond blades cutting where they cut optimally? Because the common sense could be, well, I'm going to take my 24, I'm going to run that thing in 1725, my 24-inch blade.
Well, I don't think many people try and do that, but
I'm just giving
there
you
is an optimal surface speed for diamond tool. Now the old saws tended to run a little bit slower diamond, like arbor speed on some of the diamond blades, because the old notched rim, blades, they cut differently than the sintered blades now. However, if you look at it, it's not that far off at this point in time. And most of if you look across the board, most of how people are turning blades, like all the different manufacturers, almost all the blade speeds are the same. There's tables out there that you can download from the, on the internet that show you target blade speed. They're all right there in the range of what we recommend and we use.
But you're talking about for lapidary hardstone cutting, because concrete and asphalt is going to be different.
Yeah, it's a different beast. If you look at trim saws that are designed for cutting ceramic tile, those blades, they're cranking them up. They may be turning the blade at 3,000 RPM. Now there's a way to do that with a trim saw, but in general, if you're trying to do detailed trimming on a slab for cab, trying to use a tile saw you're gonna have a lot of frustration, because you will be more apt to chip your piece. You can certainly get away with it. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that do it, but it's not as friendly.
Well, our production trim saw, though, it's running close to 5,000 RPM.
It is, but the water delivery system is a lot different on that. And then we're also running a lapidary blade, not a tile saw blade.
Right. Lori Coldham had a quick question. It's very germane to this. So how do you measure a pulley?
Measure the outside diameter. You can use a tape measure, just measure the outside diameter on it.
Yeah, so you don't have to measure in the center of it. You're going to be measuring on the outside of the pulley. And most saws in lapidary use an A size belt, unless it's like a Highland Park 36. Then they'll run a B, so it's a slightly wider belt, V belt, versus an A, which is a little bit narrow. A is like a 1/2 inch wide. Isn't that right, John? I think I'm saying right. And then a B is like,
yeah, A is 1/2 inch, and B is like 5/8, I think.
Yeah. So you want to pay attention to that. Some people ask, should I use a cog belt versus a non-cog belt, like where it has the little ripples on it. For everything we do in our factories, all just a standard V belt. We don't do a cog belt or anything like that. We're not worrying about
belt slippage. No, it's so Ken Cooper, for agates, should I use the smallest pulley? Well, the smallest pulley is your fastest feed. So it really depends on what you're doing and the size of what you're cutting. If you're cutting the biggest rock you can shove in the vise, you definitely want to get up on the biggest pulley, slow it down, so you're not just jamming the rock through. If you're cutting something that is more likely to fracture, like an opalitic or, more brittle kind of material, if you cut Mozambique agates, they're really easy to chip out the edges. So I'm always going to run, even though I'm cutting small pieces, I'm going to run on the slowest, because when that passes the rest of the way through the rock, I don't want the back of that agate. If I'm cutting for a specimen, I don't want the back of the agate to chip out. So keep my blade really sharp and run my slow speed on that. So on the step pulley, and this is true on Phantom, and this is true on Highland Park, the smaller the step that you choose to use, the faster it goes. The bigger step is the slower it goes.
It's like a bicycle. Think about riding a 10-seat bicycle, so that if you're looking at the rear gears, if you're going fast, you're going to be on the small gear in the back of the bike. And that's analogous to that step pulley. That's the kind of simple way to think about that.
So Rick
Linda,
Marshall asked a question on the HT14 slab saw, the cross feed. There's on the cross feed on that, there's only one nut. It's a nylon type lock nut. And you just want to snug it enough that you don't have side to side slop. You don't want to over tighten it. And you certainly don't want to over muscle it and twist the end off the shaft, because it is a 1/4-20. So somebody with a big wrench could definitely twist the end off that. Sandy asked question, how do I know what speed my saw is running? You measure your pulleys first. So, and it depends on the kind of saw, because there's two things. You're talking about the speed of the blade, and then you also talk about the speed of the feed. Now, on the bigger Highland Park saws, the system's integrated, because there's a drive belt that runs that feed system. On the smaller saws, there's a gear motor that runs the feed system. So it's somewhat independent. So to figure that out, you're going to measure your motor pulley, you're going to measure your arbor pulley. And you take the motor pulley size, divide it by the arbor pulley size, and then take that number and multiply it by 1725. 1725 is the motor speed. That tells you how fast your blade's running. Then on the feed, again, I'll show that table because it's really complicated. I can't talk through it. I have to illustrate it. But the great thing about the HP saws is if you keep your pulleys, sizes to factory, then everything's going to be right. Same is true on Phantom. I don't actually have a table of all the different Phantom pulleys, but I actually should get that. I need to talk to our Phantom guy. What's his name again?
Oh, Matt.
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah.
Cutting jade, is it its own different animal? Jade, in my opinion, jade is like cutting butter. Diamond will cut jade really, really, really easily. I would say cutting salamoline is its own different animal. Salamoline is really, really nasty stuff for hardness, and it's also a little brittle. And Linda mentioned deflection, 1/4 inch. Now, deflection, and she's talking about belt deflection. So when you,
this is for belt tensioning.
When you tighten up a belt on a motor, you really can't say 1/4 inch deflection and have that be the same from person to person, because it kind of depends on how hard you push on the belt. What I look for is there some movement? Like you don't want it so tight that it's like playing a banjo, because what happens then is you translate all kinds of vibration up into the machine, and you're pulling the hell out of your bearings. Right. And it's a V belt. So when you're running a V belt, it gets under force, and that V pulls down into the pulley and it bites into it really hard. And so it's hard to make a V belt slip unless it's really, really loose, or if you get oil on it. If you're getting oil on it, then you're gonna run into problems doing that. For me, I'm looking at probably somewhere in that 3/8 of an inch kind of movement in the belt, but it also depends, because if it's a feed belt, a lot of people put their feed belt way too tight. Like I'll open up a saw and if the feed belt,
boom, boom, boom.
If it's really tight, I start hollering at my people, because that feed belt, it doesn't need to be that tight. It just stresses the shit out of your bearings, and the force it takes to turn that front pulley is almost nothing. Like literally in the feed belt, you could probably take the idler off of it and it's going to keep running it, just because, it's such low force to turn that.
Yeah.
But it's a good point. I mean, the main thing I tell people is don't put your belts too tight, because that's where most people err in that direction. And then it's harder on the motor bearings, it's harder on the arbor bearings, and it translates a whole lot more vibration up into the machine.
Well, I want to talk about one point that's also when you're dealing with pulleys, because I've seen this a lot on old saws, that you got just major misalignment on pulleys. And the simple way, when we're putting the saws together in the factory, we just use a straight edge going off the one pulley to the other pulley. So we'll pre-position the pulleys and we're lining that up, because both pulleys, the thickness on the outside between where the V is and that edge is the same on top and bottom. So we'll put a straight edge and we'll align both those pulleys, because we really don't want belt deflection. That way we want it as straight as possible. So when you're setting up your pulleys, just put a straight edge between them. Literally, we use like a straight, is it like a level? I think we just use a freaking level
and use it as a straight edge. That is important, because you can't do that on your feed pulleys on like an HP or a Phantom saw,
right? Because they're offset.
That as you move to different steps, they'll be on a little bit of an angle, but that belt.
But again, you don't have high tension there. You don't have nearly the tension you do with the motor.
So Ken Cooper, I saw your comment about the non-mechanical brains and the language that we use. So we do use some very specific language about components and stuff. And what I would say is anything that we talk about that you don't understand, throw a question up on here, like, what does that mean? Because part of it is I don't know offhand what all language is understood and common for people. We certainly want to take the time to explain any of those kind of things, because we do use some specific language when we're talking about the componentry in the saw that will help people then understand and work on their saw.
Right.
Because there is like our big purpose to doing this kind of thing is there are no mechanics that you call and they're going to come fix your saw. So if you have something that needs to be done to your machine, we want to enable people that they can do any of that work themselves.
Well, let me make another thing. As we remember from Mike in Quartzsite, beware of the person who comes and saying they're a lapidary mechanic, because we saw a guy who we helped straighten out some of the stuff that was the most cobbed up saws by a lapidary mechanic expert. And I'm like, the guy just friggin' thrashed these saws, which is actually painful to see. Like the guy had no clue.
Yeah, what he was doing. Our friend Mike had this guy come in and quote fix them, and the guy did more to screw them up than anything. And he just needed the information and the guidance, and he's mechanical enough he could do it himself. He just didn't know what needed to be done.
Right.
So that's what we're really wanting to help you guys all be able to do, and to do it and be the most successful and not waste cycles doing, a repair that is simple, but choosing the wrong method and then struggling with it. So let's get into the changing out the arbor bearings and doing an alignment, because I know that there's a ton of questions around this stuff, and we'll come back and answer more questions as we get further into it. But let's run those videos next so people can.
Now what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how to take your saw down to the point where you're going to replace and reinstall arbor bearings. Now, I've removed some stuff here because it's kind of boring to watch me take it apart, but it's fairly simple. There's 2 screws that hold the catch tray on here. You take those out, and then on the arbor cover, and this is on the HP saws that are square rail, there's 4 screws here, and some people miss it, but there's 2 screws in the backside right here. Now, when you take these screws out, some people will sit there and go through all the trouble of taking these out, but it's not necessary. The arbor cover can slide off, and then you lift the back end up and you walk it off, and you can leave this all assembled. Now, if your felt is really old and bad, just replace the felt. It's really cheap. It keeps you from getting a bunch of oil and stuff into this housing with your bearings. Now, the other thing that we did that I really like, because I get tired of messing with felt, is I made this arbor cover with a thicker base here. I did an O-ring groove, so now that O-ring seals against this housing and prevents any oil from getting out. Before, we were using the felt gasket, and then you had to put ultra black on it to keep it from leaking there, because the oil will get down the shaft, then come out, and then run down the side of your saw. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these out and remove the arbor assembly. Now, what I like to do, if I got a saw that's aligned and I just have a bad bearing, and I'm going to replace that bearing or both bearings and then put it back together, that I'm going to start by loosening these set screws in the front. Now, I don't loosen the ones in the back. And the reason I don't do that is because if I leave them be, I'm going to be really close to my alignment when I go to drop it back in. Now, I'm going to tell you how to get it in quickly, because a lot of people mess with this and do this. Now, the other thing you're going to see, if you got an old machine, you wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And I know, because I had a lot of the old machines and I hated them, because you would have to stick your hand underneath here and hold your hand on a nut, on a wrench, and take it loose on the top. And that pretty much kind of sucks, because your arm, it's kind of sharp stuff underneath there, and your arm gets all mucky and all to hold a nut, because they were a little cheap on the arbor plate, and they put a thinner arbor plate and didn't even weld the nut on the bottom, which they could have done as well. I put a thicker arbor plate in it, and I tap the plate so you can service everything from the top. So I'm going to take all these bolts out. Now, the other thing you're going to see is, if you have a saw, if you have one of the, and I'm going to call it that, inferior saws that does not have the adjustments here, then the alignment process, when you get into it, you'll see how it's going to be more difficult. So now I got my arbor out and clean off my arbor plate. And, you know, like normally in a saw, you're going to be covered with muck, and then you're going to take these set screws loose, and you're going to get the arbor shaft out and put your new bearings on. And I'm not going to do that here, obviously. So I'm going to start by positioning the bearings as close as I can on the shaft, putting the shaft assembly back in. And what I'm going to pay attention to first, and I am going to do this because I'm going to show you from scratch how, I'm going to move all the set screws. I'm going to show you from scratch how to do this and not have it take forever, because it should be an easy job if you know the right way, and if you can watch somebody who knows how to do it, then you won't waste a lot of time when you're going to put it back together. And I got one bolt that is giving me a little trouble. There it is. So I get my bolts in, and the first thing I do is I'm going to look at getting this arbor shaft in the center. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about why the alignment's important. So what I do is I'm moving the shaft till I look, and the gap here and the gap here is the same. Now, what I want to do is, the first thing I want to do is I actually want to lock this bearing down. Now, these bearings are self-aligning, so you can tighten this back bearing here, because you don't want it to move, because you want it to be in the middle of this hole. Now, once I have that, then I also want to put the set screws in. Now, I'm going to show you something in a little bit about the power of these set screws, and it's also why we put big welds on these things. If anybody looks at one of the old HP saws, you'll see little tiny nuts welded on the thing, and half the time the nut gets broken off, and I freaking hate that. So I put bars on these things, so when I go to put it together, it's not going to break a nut off or something.
All right, go ahead to the next video. Just flow us right in.
I'm not going to put a blade in here because I have an alignment plate, which is for purposes of what we're doing. It's just a not very straight piece of stainless steel, and I'll tell you something about this because it's important to know that every blade is going to have a little bit. Every blade's going to have a little bit of twitch to it. It's not going to be 100% perfect. And with the technique that we do, it doesn't matter. I had to cheat a little bit. I don't have a vise on this machine yet, and this is aluminum, and the magnet won't stick to aluminum, so I had to just grab a little chunk of metal and stick it on here. But basically, what I do is on my plate, and what you should do is on your blade, you get a black Sharpie, and you make an X. Now, we have 2 X's here. Since there's 2, I have to choose one, and I want to set my indicator so I'm low on this thing, so I get the most amount of travel. So now when you set your indicator, you want it as perpendicular to the surface as you can get it. Doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's closer it is, the better. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take the set screws down so they're touching the bearing. Now, I don't know what my bearing location is. Visually, I look at it and I try and get the gap between the 2 bearings here and here the same. And when I have that, then I'm going to set my indicator to 0. And you got to make sure this is tight. And again, if your carriage is moving all around, then you really have to be careful not to touch it. So when I move the carriage, you'll see my hand is down here. I don't touch the cross feed, because if I move that even a little bit, it can throw off my measurement. So I set 0. I'm not perfectly on 0, but I'm close. And for the first pass, it's fine. And then I'm going to move the carriage from here. Now, what I'm going to do is when I move this carriage, I'm going to turn the blade. Now, when I am doing this indication, I have to follow on the point, not indicate across the face. If I indicate across the face, any error that's in my flanges, that's in my run out on my blade, that error is going to be translated into error in the alignment. So what I do by indicating the point here to the same point back here is I guarantee you that this axis is going to be perfectly perpendicular to the travel of the carriage. So I'll illustrate that now as you come back in closer. I'm going to come forward and I'm almost touching my flange, so I got to move up and reset my 0. If you bump your flange, it will change your indicator setting. So I come in and I'm looking for the indicator to move. It's come up 1 revolution. So I've come up 165. So now what I'm going to do is some really simple math. I'm going to take 165 and divide by 2. Now, the indicator's turning to the right. That tells me this face of the blade is in this direction. It's high. So this is low, and this is high. So this blade is angled like this right now. So to do that, I'm not going to mess with these screws. I'm going to focus on these screws. If I push this screw here, it's going to push the bearing, which means my angle is going to come back. Now, why on the first push I want to take half is because of the relationship. As I move this edge is also moving. So if I go, let's say 160, I want to move to 80. So now I'm going to run my indicator back until I get right here to 80. Now what I'm going to do, because I'm I'm pretty confident that my math is going to put me pretty close, is I'm going to start tightening these screws up a little bit so I have some pressure on the bearing at the 80 mark. So I'm pushing front, I'm pushing back, and then I'm on 80. So now I'm going to come back and I'm going to get on the 0 here, and it's on 70. Now that's good news, because if I'm on 80 at the back and 70 at the front, it means I'm only 10 off. So now I'm going to check my work, re-zero, and come back here. I'm going to go the same thing, and there I am. I'm 10 off, so I'm 10 high right now. Now, when I'm that close, what I want to do is I want to tighten these bearings. Because it's going to move me some, but I know I'm within 10. Now, 10, for purposes of understanding, 10 is the thickness of a human hair, average human hair. That's 0.003 of an inch. So now I'm going to tighten these 2 bolts up. And as you can see, I'm getting them pretty darn tight. They're 7/16 bolt. They can take a good bit of torque. So now my bolts are tight. Now I'm going to come back here and look at my 0. And my 0 moved just a little bit when I tighten the bearings. Now I'm going to come down here, and you'll see it move down, but it's coming back. That tells me the plate's not flat. And now I'm plus 10. So plus meaning I'm out this way. My plate is out this way. So what I want to do is I want to still keep pushing on this screw. Now I'm pretty tight here, so I'm going to have to loosen my other screw. And if you watch the indicator when I loosen it, you'll see it's moving. Now I'm going to take it to 5. I'm going to push back on it a little bit. Take it to 5, and now I'm 5 on the other side. Now, my standard is when we align these, I want to be within 3, which is 1/1000th of an inch, basically. Close to that, at least. Now, I can guarantee you, we're the only saws that are close to 1/1000th of an inch leaving the factory. Because if you don't have the alignment screws, you can't do it. So, I'm 0.01 mm in accuracy. So there it is, it's aligned. Now that wasn't hard, was it? So, now you know that that blade is going to run perfectly true. Now, if you're getting wedge-shaped slabs, and I'm going to talk about the blade alignment for a little bit. Now, I'm going to do this because sometimes it's easier to see. I'm going to loosen this up. And basically, if you look at the blade and you imagine if you're out of alignment this way and you start cutting, that what happens is it starts pulling the blade in further and further, which means it's trying to dig into the rock, and it may actually pull the blade into the edge of the carriage or edge of the vise. That's basically a real bad situation, because what happens then is it actually starts to deform the blade permanently. This is what we call dishing. Now, dishing, the best way to check for, if you have a blade that you're having problems with your saw, you have a blade that you think might be dished, is you get a hard metal ruler, a good ruler, and you lay it across the inner part of the blade inside the teeth. And if you are touching on the outside and a gap in the middle, or you're touching in the middle and a gap on the outside, your blade is dished. And you check this side and you check that side, you'll see the dish will be the opposite on the other side. If your blade is dished, there used to be shops that would fix that, but there's not really anybody that does that now. Partly because the cost of the blades has come down a lot. Now, I'm going to talk about the other way here. So, if your blade, if your arbor's out of alignment in this way, what happens is it starts cutting, and as you go, the rock starts actually pressing into the inside of the blade. And again, you're not going to get a parallel slab, and you're going to destroy the blade after very little use. If you run a saw where the arbor is not aligned, it will destroy the blade very fast. You can put a brand new perfect blade on a bad arbor, or if the arbor bearings are bad, where it allows the blade to move front to back some, the alignment's changing. If that axis moves, then with the movement, you're going to see that the blade has changed engagement in the rock. No,
that was a lot of stuff there, dude.
Did everybody get this? You now can align your saw?
Sal said, scary thing is he actually understood it, which is good. Yeah, Janet also stripped out. That's on your 24.
112 foot-pounds is, you're in the ballpark. You could be 112, 120, right around there.
Yeah, that was on your 24, Jan, I think.
Yeah, and for any bolt, you can look it up. Pretty much everything we use is grade 5. You can look it up on the web, and they'll give you torque charts for it. Let's see, what's this question here? Tony, is that method done only for larger slab saws? This is the method we use for every slab saw. And now let me be specific here, the definition of a slab saw. A slab saw has a carriage that rides on rails that may or may not have a feed mechanism, but that you are doing some version of automated cutting. Now, after distinguishing that, I would say trim saws can actually, some of the trim saws have that little sliding vise on them. There is an importance to aligning those, because if that little vise is set on there and it's a little crooked, every time you push it in by hand, your slide is on an angle compared to the blade. You're going to have a hard time getting parallel slabs. And again, you can do the same thing. Generally, the trim saws are so short of a stroke that it's more tolerant of a little error, but you'll get better results. The closer you are to being perfectly true, you'll get better results. That's I see Jan asked the question, how often do I align? I would say this: if I set up a saw and align it and put it in my shop, unless I crash it, I'm not worried about it. It's not going to move. The thing about our saws and any saw that has Arbor adjustment screws is that Arbor is not going to move. Now, the one thing I would say is I am going to throw an indicator on that Arbor shaft after, a couple years, a year or a couple years of operation, or if I'm seeing anything that looks wonky in my cutting, I'm going to put that on that Arbor shaft and make sure I don't have an Arbor bearing going bad on me. And again, if you follow through the simple checks I give you and have the one tool that you need for this, which is that dial indicator that we sell it as a blade alignment kit. If you have that one tool, you can see anything that's going on with your mechanism. You can see if the bearing's getting loose, you can see if your carriage is getting sloppy, and be able to mitigate and take the adjustment out, and then avoid having any damage to your blade. Because the biggest risk for alignment is that you damage the blade because you're running the saw out of alignment.
Yeah. One of the questions that somebody asked is, can you use this on Starb Diamond? Steve had asked that. Yeah, the principle is the same.
You can use this on any saw. Now, in the video, you heard me say, if the saw doesn't have an alignment screws, it's inferior. Now, I believe that because I really see so many people that will have problems damaging blades because they have a saw out of alignment, and then the saw will be laboring. And if you look at like the old Lortone saws, the LS12, the LS14, and even the LS10, which they stopped making a long time ago, all of those, they in my opinion, they made a mistake on, and they never rectified it. Which was they used a stamped steel bearing, which was pretty crappy bearing. and they had no means for adjusting it. Now, I used to have a bunch of those saws in my shop. And because I realized that if I didn't have them aligned, I was going to start wiping out blades, I would sit there and go through all this trouble trying to align them. And they're just impossible.
But we have a
to get
video that you
perfect.
shot about that.
Yeah, I will talk about that in a minute. But you can still align those saws. But what you have to do is you have to tighten up the bolts and then tap the bearing, check it, tap the bearing, and then tighten them a little bit more and hope they don't move, and then tap it. And oh, it went too far, and then tap it back. And you're doing the same thing, but you just don't have set screws that you could just lean on. And the set screws make it so easy, because if you lock down the one bearing that's going through the wall of the saw, so it's not moving, and then you're moving the other bearing. The challenge is without the set screws, that other bearing, when you go to tighten it, it tries to move. Now, the cast iron bearings are more stable than the stamp steel. So stamp steel, when you go to tighten it down, it's really hard to keep them from moving. And that's why on those older saws like that, they are just a lot more work. Now, to answer Jan's question, the second part of the question is, on a Lortone 12 or 14 or old 10, I will check that alignment much more frequently, because literally, if your blade pressure comes up, you're going to start shoving the bearing some. And if you have a crash, the bearings are going to move for sure.
Why don't you tell people what a crash is?
A crash means you're running your saw, and sounds pretty good, and maybe there's an internal fracture in the saw, or the saw
slips in the rock, internal fracture in the rock,
whoonk, and the saw stops and locks up and going, and you're going, oh shit, and you run over and shut off your saw. That's a crash. And some crashes are fatal on the blade, and you get this big Z bend in the front edge of your blade, and you're going, oh man. And some are like, oh, it just locked up, and you pull it out and you go, oh, thank God it didn't break my blade. That's a crash. If you have a crash in your saw, which, even if you're really good at what you're doing, it's possible to have it happen. That's when you got to check your stuff, make sure nothing got damaged. That's when it's good to have an indicator and go, okay, I didn't screw up my blade, did my arbor move. And it's if you have the tool, it's really fast to do that. And you can be like, okay, everything's fine. I will say this. This is probably one of my number one pet peeves. I have people that don't understand alignment. They'll buy a new saw from us, and they'll put it in their shop, and they'll have a little problem. Now, usually they have a problem because they're running the wrong oil, and their blade pressure comes up, and their saw starts laboring. And they
almost think, every single time.
And then they ask advice online, and everybody will go, oh, your arbor's out of alignment. Now they got a brand new saw that I aligned to 0.003 inch. And then I'll get a message and they'll say, oh, the arbor was way out, and I realigned it. And then I'm like, I'm just really concerned for them, because I know if they said it was way out and they realigned it and they didn't follow this method, which the most common mistake is they'll take the indicator, put it on the side of the blade and indicate front to back, and they won't turn the blade. And if the blade's got any lack of straightness in it, or the flanges, they just translated all that right into the arbor. Why we pick a point and take that point from the front to the back is that point is in relationship to the blade exactly the same when you rotate it front to back. You've removed from the equation any run out in the flanges, any run out in the blade. You've removed it from the equation.
This is super, super important, because when you set that geometric plane by defining a single point, your blade can be bent to fuck. And as long as you're measuring off that same point, that geometric plane that you're defining is going to take any of those variables out. Super important. Like
we also hear in the flanges, like on old saws, if you got run out, a little bit of run out on your blade, if your arbor's aligned, it won't matter.
Right.
Because what will happen is the blade will sit there, and you'll see this, how you can identify run out on a saw is when it starts in the cut, the width of the cut is a little wider. And then when it sets down into that rock, So what you'll see is when you look at the slab, you look at the slab and there'll be a little bit of looks like a low notch on the front edge where the cuts start. Well, that tells you got a little blade run out. So the blade's going back and forth, and then it gets into the rock and it sets down and it behaves. If you see a wedge-shaped slab, then one of two things has happened. The person's trying to cut with a saw that's out of alignment, or that the blade is dished. Now, if you put a dished blade on a straight saw, it's going to cut a wedge. And the reason why is the blade is sitting there at an angle or a curve, and that it's going to sit there and try and keep cutting, because it's a dish shape. So a dish blade, there is a technique, and I haven't mastered it, but it's masterable. But for retensioning a blade, because when a blade gets dished, you can retension it, and the technique is pretty it's old school. And there's some of these old guys were brilliant at it. And basically what they had is they had a small piece of pipe, and they had like a ball peen hammer, or they had a punch that had a ball on the end of it, and the blade is laid on a surface, and the pipe is underneath it. And you take the ball right above the punch and you tap on it a little bit, and you run a pattern all the way around the blade symmetrically. And what's happening is, by putting the ball against the pipe and hitting it, you're stretching the metal a little bit. So you're pulling the stretch that's in the center of the blade that makes it dish. You're pulling that stretch out. Now, I've done this before myself, because I'll be like, no money, and I got one blade and I got to get it working again, and I'll sit there and spend like 3 hours pinging it until I get it so it's not got, like, as a dish, when you grab the edges of the blade and you push it side to side, you'll feel it go boing, boing, because the center has gotten bigger than the outside edge. And by putting a whole bunch of little peen marks all around on the blade, and I try and draw circles on it and do it symmetrically, you are pulling that metal up. You're stretching the metal in the center. Now, they have machines now that do that tension the blades, but like, it's a pretty expensive machine for doing that. So you can play with that if you get a dish blade. It's not like you're going to make it less valuable. You might actually be able to resalvage it. So
why don't we go to that video, because there's some questions around Covington saws and other saws that don't have adjustments. Why don't we just run through that one video next?
Okay, sure.
And then we got a ton of questions we're going to dive into. We may have, I don't know quite what we've got, but do that next video, Johanna.
Now let's talk for a little bit. I don't have one here, obviously, but let's talk a little bit about Phantom saws. Covington is their Arbor design on the bigger saws is also the same, where you have a flange that bolts to it's like an Arbor assembly. The flange bolts to the side of the tank, and then there's like 2 ears down here, and there's 2 bolts in the ears. Now, if you have that kind of saw, you still can align it, but it's more difficult. And why it's more difficult is you can't do what I did with the fine adjustment with the set screws to push the Arbor in. So what you have to do on those is you take these 2 screws at the front and you loosen them a little bit. You check your alignment first, you see where you are, and you loosen them a little bit so you can push the Arbor. Now, I've done this before. If you are enough out of line, you can take a drill and open up those holes a little bit so you have a little bit more push to be able to get it into alignment. Now, the other thing you can do, and this is true on a number of the old saws, is if you have slop in the rail system, you can loosen those bolts up and push the front or the back of the rail system in and out to fudge even more to getting it into alignment. It's not as easy. If you have a square rail HP, it's super easy. If you have any of our smaller saws, all our slab saws have this adjustment, because you can see how easy it is to align this way. Then once you get the alignment on like a Covington or a Phantom saw, once you get the alignment, as you're tightening those bolts down, you have to keep checking it, because sometimes when you tighten the bolt, it will move. Now this.
So
Good.
does that help everyone understand if any of you guys have Covington or I think Diamond Pacific's Arbor setup is also the same as that.
What was it? It was the same as Contempo. You remember the Contempo machines? Yeah.
Contempo actually took some of that concept out of the Phantom Arbor and continued to use it.
Right. What other videos do we have after this one? So we just kind of know our time to on it.
There was one more. Let's see, what's our time right now?
It's 7:58.
So you know what? Let's save that one, and I really want to take as many questions as we can.
We got a lot of
People
questions.
got a lot of questions.
JP, he asked a question. Well, actually, let's see. Where is the question start here? Lori, I'm just going to start at the top. Lori Coleman says, any chance y'all thinking about a variable speed motor on a slab saw?
There's actually only one saw that I am building right now where I'm doing that. On smaller saws, it really doesn't make sense to, because I don't want to really change the blade speed and get outside of the sweet spot. Having the feed variable is nice, but we kind of accomplish that with the step pulleys without adding any more technology. I'm building these big 45-inch saws right now, and I am putting a variable frequency drive on the main blade, but it's more a means of keeping the drive system really simple, because I can dial in the blade speed. But in most cases, you wouldn't want to alter the blade speed. You want to get into the sweet spot where you hear the diamonds starting to sizzle, and then you leave it be.
Right. Sal was saying, think about cutting some basalt. Bad idea, too hard? What's your question?
Basalt is like cutting butter.
It's really soft. Yeah, so no problem there. Norm says, our carriage gets really tight left to right positions. What to secure? It's an HP 18. So far left, far right. It sounds like kind of a tightening or binding.
I think that's a call Sherman or call Lizelle. And
yeah, get me booked on that one, because that's going to be diving into specifics that we don't need to necessarily do in this whole thing. But
yeah,
we can
usually,
get into it.
let me speak to this a little bit. Usually, if you start getting that kind of thing, there's two things I would caution people on. One, if you are working in an environment that has big heat, big temperature changes, like if you walk into your shop in the wintertime and heat it all up and then run it, and then it gets cold, you can get condensation inside your saw. And if that moisture gets into your cross bead, it can cause some of that. So if you're in a big temperature shift kind of thing, I would recommend leaving the hood up when you're not running, because it lets the moisture evaporate.
Right. Yeah. Richard had a question. So what about when there's a chip out at the last corner of the piece? Is it the rock? I just sharpened the blade and checked the alignment and the movement of the carriage on the rails, but I still get a little chip when you're coming out. I assume, Richard, when you're coming out the other side of the cut, is it expected something because of the rock?
Well, I mean, some of that's going to be the rock. I mean, even when you're cutting at a really slow speed and you're cutting certain materials, some of them you're just going to get that, because part of it is you got the weight of the rock hanging on that one little last bit. And that when that, like, you get enough of the vibration and the, force of the cut, even if it's very light, it can, when it breaks loose, it can take just a little tiny chip out of the tail end.
Yep. Nick had asked, or Nicole had asked on YouTube, is there a way to keep a 1/4-inch slab from dropping between the saw and the catch plate into the tank? It's kind of a pain.
Okay.
In that particular case,
the big thing is you adjust your catch tray over as close as you can to the blade. Now, I cut iris, How many people here know what iris agate is?
Jen does.
So
Yeah.
when you cut iris, it's cutting thin, kind of mostly colorless looking agates that most people would throw away. And you get this rainbow effect because the iris, it's called an iris agate. And you'll see pictures. If you go up and look on Facebook, there are pictures of them. But when you cut the stuff, you're usually cutting it like a 1/16 of an inch thick. Now, what I do when I'm cutting iris is I will get, I just get a sheet of like 1/8 inch thick rubber. You can buy it various places, but I will get that and I actually lay it right up against the edge of my blade while I'm running, because I don't want my iris slab go down in between the blade and get stuck there and chew it all up. Because even if you set the gap really small when you got a 1/16 of an inch slab, you know, you really can't adjust the arbor, the catch tray close enough to keep it 100% from getting out. But if I lay that rubber up against the edge of the blade, then it will always flop over from me and I don't have a problem. Right. So the first thing I do is adjust the catch tray so it's a lot closer. And then if you still have some problems, get yourself a little sheet of rubber. You know, it can be like something simple, like get at Home Depot, a little like rubber matting stuff that, you know, they have a little vinyl sheet. It'll work the same, the clear vinyl. You just cut off a piece and lay it in there. And it also makes it so the slab doesn't hit the catch tray, you know, like some materials will break if they do that.
Right. Eric had a question. I thought I saw Eric's hand up as well, but the question he had was, I have a 70s HP 24. I like your arbor plate. Do you sell a replacement part? No, we don't. That's welded in there. So that's not something you can swap out on a 24 easily. And you said also, is your replacement arbor cover the same as what you showed with the rubber gasket? At this point in time, not on the 24s, right?
Yeah, I did the new style arbor on the 16, so 14, 16, 18, 20. But I'm not doing the new style on the 24. I've got like, I don't know, I got probably 100 of the arbor covers in stock right now. When I run those out, then I may do a new mold because I really like the O-ring. And it's a lot simpler, because if you want to lube your bearings with the felt style gasket that has the glue on it, it's, you know, you have to kind of carefully get a knife in there and cut the glue and not screw up your felt. So you don't have to take your arbor bearings out, and then you take the arbor cover off and lube your bearings. And then put it back together. There was actually a question about how frequently you should lube your bearings.
Wes had asked.
It depends on how, like, okay, in our shop, in our production shop, I'm going to pull arbor covers off once a year and lube everything, but we're running 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. If you're a hobbyist, honestly, most people could go years before they'll rack up the hours and need to do it. And, you know, like with the new arbor covers I'm doing, it's way easier, because this takes 6 screws out, pop it off, lube it, pop it back on. But with the felt gasket, it is a lot more of a pain in the butt, because you know, you have to cut the glue loose and hopefully not screw up your felt. And if you screw up your felt, then you're pulling your arbor bearings out to put the new felt in. It's like, you don't want to do it frequently if you have that style arbor cover.
Yeah. Does that answer your questions, Eric? I see Eric's got his hands raised here. Come on up.
Got me muted.
Oh, you're unmuted. We hear you.
Okay. I have welder friends, and I would love to replace my base plate, because all the things you described suck.
Yes.
So I'd like to have that plate. And one of these days, if I were to do that, I would also replace the arbor cover with your new one. I have one of the old ones. And like you said about the felts, those are kind of a pain. I would really love to get that arbor plate. So if you put me on your list, or when you get there.
Well, there's going to be a challenge with that arbor plate.
Let me explain the arbor plate. The arbor plate is integral into the framework of the saw.
But I believe it's welded to the rail.
It is welded to the rail, and I'll tell you this: taking the old arbor plate off and then putting a new one on, that would be a job. Now, here's what I would recommend: if you have an old saw and you hate putting your hands underneath it, I would take it down, clean it up, pull the hood off, go over to a weld shop or have a welder yourself. I'd get the heavy duty nuts, and I'd go on the underside and pull a bolt through to hold the nut in place, and I'd weld those nuts on the bottom side of the arbor plate, and then you've got
the same
down
thing.
service only, and you don't have to mess with
And
it.
the other thing is you're going to change the diameter. If you put one of our arbor plates in there, now that arbor's sitting higher, and now you're going to have your flanges and everything else higher as well, because we dropped those rails down when we put that plate in, because we wanted to keep the dimension. So it's not something you want to drop in there because your geometry is not going to work out relative to the vise.
Welding the nuts on the bottom, that's the way to handle it.
Those screwy nuts are a pain in the butt. I like your Allen wrench thing. I was hoping there would be an easy way to do that, but you just ruined my day. I don't want to talk to you.
Sorry. I mean, the other thing you can do is you can put your unit up on Facebook Equipment Marketplace, Marshalls, and then sell it, and then get another unit and solve the problem. So thanks.
My budget doesn't allow for that. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna keep cranking. So JP had he says, can you essentially solve all the blade force problems by running a slower speed and let the blade do its work outside of bad bent blades, of course?
Well, let me speak to that, because blade force occurs, and we talked about this when we talked about oil. Blade force occurs if you have an inferior blade, you're running the wrong oil, or your blade is dull.
Mm-hmm.
So if your blade is sharp and it's a good blade and you're running the right oil, then blade force is not really like going to be a big issue. Like if you cut Mookite all day long, you're going to sharpen that. You're going to sharpen that blade very frequently. But for most people cutting jaspers, agates, miscellaneous stuff like that, it's not a problem. Most people, they'll run into a problem because they are running the wrong oil, or
oil is definitely the number one biggest issue that we see is oil. Wrong oil causing huge amount of problems.
Yeah, for sure.
John Wozniak asked, I have an old HP M4. I was told it was 14.
I saw that question. So John was asking, can he put a 16-inch blade on his HP 14? Now the boxes on those were pretty much exactly the same. If the blade will fit, you definitely can turn it, and you definitely can align it, and you can run it. I did the original design off of an HP 14 for our 16, and then I realized the box is basically the same. Like everything's the same. So like you got to have enough horsepower to turn the blade, but you have a 3/4 horse on there, it's perfect, and you can definitely run it as a 16.
Yep. Ed had asked a question. What's the best procedure for aligning a blade on a 14-inch drop saw?
Well, the beauty to a drop saw is there's only one thing that matters for blade alignment. And that is, if you look at the blade, it can't be like this. It can't be like this. It has to be straight up and down. That's the only thing to look at. Now, depending on the design of the drop saw, it should be inherent in the design that it cannot be on an angle. If it's not, then I would say the design has got some problems. Other than that, you don't have to worry about anything, because the blade is just going to come straight down. Right. You're not stroking through it. Your travel is based around that. Now, if your pivot bearings on a drop saw, if your pivot bearings go bad, it will cause you problems. So you got to make sure that they're in good shape. And other than that, there's nothing else to do.
Right. One question we had is, with new manufacturing methods and better QA, QC, are new blades less subject to dishing? Unfortunately, no.
No. What I would say is the nature of the diamond blade. It likes to go in a straight. It likes to go in a straight line. If anything occurs, the carriage is sloppy, the crossfeed's sloppy, or you got the carriage is lifting at the backside. Those are all things are going to affect the blade and affect it detrimentally. And if any have seen our comparative video on like the Covington saw, like the Covington crossfeed has a single crossfeed rail in the front, so the back of that vise can lift some. That to me is like not a desirable feature, because if it's lifting, it's moving, and that can affect how the blade's engaging in it. You take that and you add crossfeed slop, and you're going to have binding. You're going to have problems.
Let me ask you a question, John, because you had mentioned there's 2 causes for blade dishing. And my question is there a third cause of blade dishing? And that is,
let me say this, because as soon as you said 2, I'm like, okay, yeah, arbor alignment can definitely cause it. There's really 3. Mm-hmm. Arbor alignment can cause blade. That's probably number 1 cause for it. Number 2 is the carriage or the crossfeed is all jinky and sloppy, like the old Lortones that particularly have a lot of miles on them. They get really super sloppy like that. You're going to dish blades with those. But actually, the third is a little less obvious. If you run a blade that's dull a long time and you just keep jamming it into rock, you're going to dish that blade even if everything in the saw is perfectly aligned, because you're jamming the blade, and the blade is going to sit there and look at that rock and try and find the fastest path through it, and it isn't always a straight line. It's going to go to the softer area in the rock, and that usually isn't right in front of it. It's going to be a little off to the side, and as soon as that starts happening, then that blade starts picking up a little dish. And you can actually put a reasonable amount of dish in a blade in a single cut if it's cutting something that's hard and it's a long enough cut.
Well, and also this gets back to coolant too, because if you're running crappy coolant and you're building high blade force, you're also generating a lot of heat, which is also going to, like I've seen people at shows where you'll touch, like I'll pop in the saw that they're cutting and it's running bad. I touch the blade, it's freaking hot as all get out.
Yeah.
Will that also damage your tension in your blade if you're freaking smoking your blade?
The blade is dull. And if it's getting hot, then the blade's dull, and yeah, you're deflecting. So deflection can cause it as well, even on a perfectly aligned saw.
Right. We got a question from Alvin saying, how do I test evaluate my flanges? And we talked a little bit about flanges last week. Can you just do a recap on that? Because there's obviously a visual looking. And we have a video on checking flanges, by the way. Maybe the team can find the flange inspection video that we had. I think we did it around the Model 6, but it still applies.
Yeah. So on a flange, the first thing I look at is I look at the backside of the flange where it seats up to the arbor, and I look at the face of the arbor. If I see any damage there, it's highly suspect that that's going to cause me a problem. Now, I will tell you this: you got 2 flanges. I've seen people wipe out one, and then you just, the main thing is if you put your best flange up against the arbor, sometimes you can still be okay, even if one of the flanges is a little damaged.
Right.
What I personally would do if I wanted to know if my flanges were running out and I don't have like any kind of machine other than the indicator, is I'd put the blade and flanges on, and then I'd set the indicator right above the top of the flange, real close, and I'd rotate that blade and I'd look at my deflection. If you set it on right there, everything's bolted up, you put it right above the flange, and then you rotate the blade and you're seeing the needle barely move, then you go, okay, I'm pretty good. But if you put it on there and you got a pretty decent deflection, then you know at the outside edge of the blade is going to be really,
because it's going to get bigger. That deflection is going to get bigger out on the outside versus in that inside. So we have a question from Tony. What is the recommended oil immersion depth for a 14-inch blade on an old LS14?
I'd run 3/8 to 1/2 inch.
Yeah.
So, and I want to answer a couple of Craig Zwicky. Do you need to run oil in the HP10? Absolutely, I'd run oil in that machine. It's got too many. It's got too many parts that if you were running a water or water soluble, you're going to lock things up. Covington C brand oil. Yeah, buy our oil. I've looked at most of the people's other oil. The only other oil that I know of that's anywhere in the game is Kessler's, and his is a recycled oil, so it has more odor to it.
Yeah, the big thing you've got to watch out for oils, I guess a big issue is if it has a petroleum distillate, which is a solvent, and you typically do that when you got you get a cheaper mineral oil because it's expensive to make shit in America. You throw a solvent in to thin it down, you're going to have much bigger viscosity swing. But the other thing it does is we've had it avoids the warranty on Highland Park saw because the solvent strips the lubrication out of your roller bearings in your carriage, whether it's a high tone series, which has got the 3 roller bearings under the rails, or the Pro Series saws or the square rail saws, you'll start losing roller bearings. And we had enough of that problem early on when we were recommending people to buy the Kingsley North oil that were like, ah, shit, this is too expensive. Once we discovered that was the problem. So you don't want any kind of solvents because it's going to attack the lubrication in your bearings. I got the questions here right in front of me, John.
All right.
Tegan had asked, do you put slabs in the kitty litter right off the saw? I do. I mean, I just got bins of kitty litter. I just drop them.
Kitty litter. And I buy the cheapest.
Joan Beckham. Good to see you, Joan. She got a question here.
Kitty litter you can get.
Yeah. What is our market for all those slabs that you're cutting? You know, I mean, that's really Russ was up, you know, when Russ Knuth was on earlier. I mean, he does a lot of business in, you know, in his slabs and cabs groups, and people are selling slabs up there. A lot of people want to buy slab because it takes the risk out of it buying the stone. They can see what the pattern is and they can think about what they can make.
And they may not have a slab saw yet.
That's right. That's right. Rick Marshall says, I believe John said earlier that HT10 has a nylon adjustment, and I heard that. No, it's 2 jam nuts that are jammed together. So there is a video that we posted.
I thought I was talking about the HP12.
Yeah.
Was it the 10? The 10 does have actually the 10 has 2 collars.
Well, it's got a collar, but it's got an adjustment on the left side. It's a jam nut.
It's got 2
of them.
HP10. HP10.
No, I'm talking to HT14.
Oh, 14.
It's HT14.
Oh, it does have 2 nuts. It
has 2 nuts. We just posted a video, a link up there, Rick, that shows you how to adjust that. I did a video on that, and I think staff, can you just post that up there again? And then
hey, so I wanted to ask everybody, like, how's this week and last week been? Has it been valuable for you guys? Am I answering, you know, are we giving you information for the right kind of stuff to help you service your saws?
Yep, great. Yes, much. Very valuable, very happy.
Good.
Very valuable. Yeah. I tell you, so I have a request for all of you. Like, you know, obviously John and I are just doing this stuff because we love the hobby. We need your help. And one of the things we need your help on is give us some good Google reviews.
Yeah, send them a link for Google reviews. We need some.
Give us some good. If you like what we're doing, post it. Use the link here. Put the link up there as well. Give us a good review because in the world, like, reviews do matter. Everybody looks. Unfortunately, you know, we've had, I think, like 2 people that were like kind of assholes, and I really tried to help them, but they were committed to being unhappy.
There's nobody like that.
Oh yeah. But give us some good reviews. You like this, post it, give us a review. Other thing is, if you got cool pictures to share, put it up, like share your pictures. I don't know if you have anything around how to do that, sharing customer pictures.
Yeah, well, and if you're making really great stuff on our equipment, send us pictures. We'll promote you.
Yeah, we'll definitely promote you. All right, I got some other questions here. Joan was also asking, how do you clean the plexiglass covers after they build up corrosion? You don't really get corrosion with the plexiglass. You're going to get discoloration probably. And when I clean, like if I got a high tone 10, which has that plastic plexiglass door, I just use like 409 and clean it. That seems to work pretty well on that. I mean, it always is going to, after a while, it's going to be not as beautiful and clear, but I never really look in the saw that much when I'm cutting. I'm listening more than anything else. Earth's Art Customs from Tim from YouTube. I have a Raytech 18 and the blade turns in the opposite direction as a typical saw. Are segmented blades directional? No, typically they're not. In the old days, they used to be.
Yeah, the old Felker blades, they had the notched rims set on an angle. They weren't perfectly perpendicular. All the blades now, you flip them around, run them either way. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. That Raytech saw is a cool Raytech saw. I remember when you used to have one of those, John.
So, how many people have hydraulic feeds on their saws? Anybody on here have hydraulic?
Like old Contempos or Diamond Pacifics? Weren't those the main two ones that had hydraulic?
Yeah. Well, their Ducats had a pseudo hydraulic.
Yeah.
You can, Mike Young.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to comment about the hydraulics. I know there's not that many people running them. I used to run them in my shop because I was preforming spears back before I designed the core drill. And I wanted to push the blades as fast as I could. And I didn't care about the cut quality. I just wanted to remove material fast. The real key with hydraulic saws is that you got a hydraulic cylinder that's extending and then withdrawing. And if you get muck in your saw, it pulls out all that back right into the cylinder. And one of the things that I didn't really think about back then was, keeping the oil clean, because of course we didn't have Evercleans back then. For the people running hydraulics, I would say the number one thing is keeping your oil clean, because the hydraulics and dirt are not friendly. But if you keep the oil clean, like putting an Everclean on a hydraulic saw, then your sustainability of the hardware is going to be much, much better. I know when I ran hydraulics, I was going through cylinders and pumps, and that was just a classic thing. I would go through those, every year. And they were fast. But if I kept my oil clean back then, I probably would have extended the life considerably.
Yeah. We had 3 more questions here, John.
Okay.
So Mary from Facebook had a question. I bought an old HP 18. It looks great, but it has oil from decades ago down the sides. Any suggestions of what degreaser to clean it with? Also, what kind of oil to run with it? So Mary, like on the saw, you want to run a pure mineral oil, nothing with solvents or any stuff, because that's on your body as well.
We just use our HP Cool Cut.
HP Cut, it's the best stuff out there.
Other crap. Cleaning the stuff off, here's what I would say. Because I've cleaned out a ton of old saws, and you get all kinds of weird stuff that caked up on them. I would get in there and scrape it with a putty knife. I just scrape the hell out of it and take time doing that. And then beyond that, you can use a wire brush some and get some of it off, and then clean it out, set it up, and run it, because you're going to make muck anyway. Some people go through everything and restore them, but if it kind of depends on whether you like restoring things or like cutting rocks. If you like cutting rocks, then putty scraper it, wire brush it, clean it out, put good oil in it, and then run it and have fun.
Right. Absolutely. Sal was asking, I cut soft stones, marble, alabaster, onyx, too soft for feed, or problem with the silt sludge? I actually don't understand that question, Sal.
Those rocks are going to make a lot of muck. It definitely would benefit from running an Everclean on that, because you will muck up your saw and you'll get a whole bunch of crud in the oil. And if you run it with really dirty oil, it's hard on the mechanism. So keep it cleaner.
Resort Dog from YouTube. We're streaming up on YouTube and Facebook both, I think. I have an L14 drop, and Dawn, I'm assuming he's Don LePew, said to have a 13-pound down weight on the blade. Any ideas? Need a half horsepower motor, not the 1/3 eBay seller had it on a 3/8 concrete blade. So you're kind of refurbing that. So yeah, I would run a half horsepower. It depends if that's an old L Lortone 14 drop. I think all you can put on that is a NEMA 48. Is that correct, John? That old machine?
Yeah, that was set up for a NEMA 48.
I've got half horsepower NEMA 48s in stock, so we could hook you up on that. In terms of the weight, it depends on what you're cutting.
Sounds like a lot.
That's a lot.
I think we have about 6. I think ours is about 6 pounds max. I mean, you could push it a little bit harder. I think, again, run good oil. If, you're cutting with it, run good oil, put a good blade on it. And like we run ours in our warehouse, and it cuts great with just. Oh
my God, it's great. It's great for slab
weights on it.
Wicked fast. Kurt said, I have an HP Model 12. While using it, I'm getting small amount of cutting oil coming out of the back where the lid and the tank come together. The blade spray car appears to be properly aligned. So he's getting like little seeping out. It could be where those bolts go through, John.
Take a picture of it.
Yeah, take a picture of it to us, Kurt.
Send it to us. We'll figure out where it's coming from. It may just need a little ultra black.
Awesome. If you got a little leak to seal that up.
Yeah.
Now I got a question for you, John. We do have some questions from last time that we haven't answered.
Well, hit a couple more of them. I got a little bit of time here. I'm willing to give these guys a little bit more time.
Okay, so I want to filter out. Come on, I only want to look for the new ones. Filter. Okay. All right. Jan, are drive belts all the same shape, or do they vary by saw manufacturer? No, they're really mostly so there's like A56, A51, like there's an A number typically. That's the width of them. Pretty much all the belts on Lapidary saws, unless you're taking like a big 36-inch Highland Park, are going to be A size belts.
And if you need any help with finding a belt for your machine, we can probably help.
We can help you get hooked up there.
So Bill
was saying,
hold on a sec, Sherm. Bill Corey asked about his Covington gravity feed saw worth using. Now I will say this: my first saw was a gravity feed HP 12, and that was the most frustrating experience of my life, and that's why you'll never see me. That's why you'll never see me make a gravity feed saw unless I built the Great Western saws.
Yeah,
but they're not really a true gravity feed saw. I would suggest if you got a saw like that and you're really wanting to slab, take it, put it up on the equipment marketplace, sell it, get yourself a power feed saw, because the difference is it's really
night and day. Yeah, night and day. Arnold was saying video cleaning on paper bags. Yes, I'll do that. I bought the buckets. I just got to go shoot the video. So yes, we'll do that. Josh, best grease for use on the bearings. There is a very particular code grease that you need to use, and I forget what it is, John. It's in the owner's manual. On our website, you can download any of the owner's manuals, and in the owner's manual on the 14, 16, 18, 24, 36, it tells you exactly the
grease
specification of the grease to use.
You can buy it at AutoZone.
It's nothing special, but you want to meet that specification. Daryl was asking, is a heater for oil realistic? Yeah, Jan Wade uses that in his saw. He's got the magnetic ones that he's used for preheating. It certainly can be done there. I'm just flying through the Stacy, who's on here. I don't have a cleaning unit. How dirty can the oil get before I need to clean the saw? Don't do what my brother did one time.
With dirty oil, don't let it turn into gel. Get it while it's still liquid. If it starts to get jelly, then it starts sticking all over the inside of the saw and turns into a whole lot more work to clean up.
Yeah.
So you'll probably do that once. After you do it once, you'll be like, I'm going to change it earlier.
Yeah. Danny asked a question last time. Does a diamond blade wear out? Yeah. Ultimately, when you wear all the diamond off of it and it's gone, then yeah, it's worn out. Yeah. But typically we find all the time people come to our website thinking they got a bad blade. we put that video up there on how to sharpen your blade. They're like, well, I'm going to try that. And the amount of people who've called me up and says, you know what? I hate to say this because I came to buy a blade from you, but I watched my video. I sharpened my blade and my blade's fine. I'm like, I'm fine with that. John and I are not here just to make money. Some people think we do. They're like, oh my God, they're making this shit. We want to make the hobby successful, which is why we give away so much information. I'd much rather you buy rock from me than buying a replacement blade that you don't need. That was like I don't know if anybody heard that first story that I talked about, where one of the other manufacturers told us that we shouldn't sell replacement parts because if we do, people wouldn't buy new saws. And I'm like, man, that's somebody who is corrupted by the money. They don't give a shit about the hobby.
Some people are just in it for the money, and we love the hobby. I've been cutting rocks since 1970.
Yeah, that's been a long time. Greg, does belt tension affect binding? I don't know if Greg's on here, but
belt tension is not going to be really directly related to binding. If you get binding in your cut,
that's alignment issue.
Take both these for these webinars. Watch what I do for diagnosing the carriage, diagnosing the crossfeed, diagnosing the arbor. Look at those things and look at your alignment. Chances are, if you're getting binding, it's going to be one of those, and make sure your blade's not dished.
Yeah,
it's a really simple group of things. And if you have one of our alignment kits, put up the alignment kit there. If anybody doesn't have one, needs one, put that up, Mark.
Yeah, it's a great deal on the alignment
because
kit.
That is the tool that you can use to diagnose all the problems, in the saw. It's one tool. You can align with it. You can check your carriage. You can check all your slop. You can check your arbor banks, all that with one tool. And you handle it with, it's a precision instrument. So you don't bang on the end of the thing or let it get dropped or anything like that. I mean, it will take some abuse, but it's a valuable tool for really knowing what kind of condition your saw is in and where your problem is. Because a lot of people will sit there and ask questions on Facebook, and then they'll get 100 different answers that are all kind of random. And I wanted to break it down so I can give you guys a clear methodology for how to look at each part of the saw and find out where your problem is. Is it a dished blade? Is it a loose carriage? And with this tool, you can do that.
Right. Richard had a question. What is the frequency do you sharpen your blade? Is it be feel on the finger? Now, you really can't feel it on the finger.
No, I mean, I'll tell you the criteria that I use more than anything else is I listen to the saw. Mm-hmm. If my saw is running and I hear this, it sounds good, then I'm happy. But if I hear this, and you can hear it laboring, it's loading up, it's like, okay, yeah, I've been asleep, I haven't sharpened my saw. If I'm cutting a lot, like if I'm cutting high-end material and I'm cutting 8 hours a day, I'm going to sharpen it once a day.
Right.
Because it takes me a few seconds to do that.
Nothing.
And I don't want it to break out the back of my material. If I'm cutting really hard stuff, same way. So the frequency really has to do with listen to the saw, because the saw is going to talk to you. You can hear the blade when it's running really smooth and doesn't feel like it's pushing that hard, and the diamonds are doing the work. If it starts sounding like it's loading up and it's, really making the saw work, then that's the first indication that your blade is dull.
Yep. Hey, Scott's got his hand up. Scott, when? Bring up Scott.
Okay, hey, Sherman, John.
How you doing, dude?
Question. Thanks. I've got 3 saws. I've got 3 Everclean units. And when you send out an Everclean unit, you got a lot of hoses and everything. And I'm always wondering if I'm supposed to be putting something like a tube or something from the inside of the box into the middle of the saw or something to help access more muck.
We used to do that, but what we found is that it just really increased the risk of drawing chips into the pump, and then the pump would get stuck and then your cleaning action stops. And so I had experimented with pulling because we used to have a pickup for it too. I pulled that off, and then I ran it in my saws for a long time and see what the difference was. And it really, it slowed down the pickup, slowed down the oil delivery. Yep. And so the cleaning was essentially less troublesome and more effective by having it just run wide open. Right. Okay. But we need to look at that. It should be just one hose comes with it now, right, Sherman?
For each Everclean, one hose comes from the pump, goes up to the top of the Everclean. It's possible, depending on when you got that, Scott, there could have been like confusion in the warehouse staff.
Yeah,
like that's
there
always you notice that everybody's bought, like everything's going barcoding because when you bring people in and generally I got some great people right now in my warehouse, but I don't know how long.
It needs to be set. Like we've really been focusing a lot on our systems right now.
Right. Barcoding.
Like we got thousands of parts. We got thousands of parts, and Sherman and I know the parts really well. But when you hire somebody into warehouse, if it doesn't have a barcode on it and a part number, they're going to be like, "What the hell's this?"
Okay. Well, I got a fourth one sometime for my new core drill, which will come here shortly.
I think John has been working on your core drill.
I have been. I got the frames all assembled, and I got the heads going on, and I get hydraulic cylinders probably this afternoon.
Well, we are excited. We're very excited.
It's super cool. And Lori's got one. Lori Coleman, who's on this call, she's got a core drill as well.
Yeah, she's got one of the big drills.
Yep. And then probably Jason Russell may be on here too. He's got them as well. I'll hook you up with other people that have been doing it, because it's great to talk to people. You'll trash a bit. It's going to happen. As you probably learning.
What?
A bit.
Okay. I always tell people when they start running a core drill, the first thing to accept is that you're going to crash a bit.
Yeah.
And well, my question. If you accept that up front, then you're like, okay, the first time it happens, you'll be like, all right, got it. Put the teeth back on it.
Another question: does that take a 6-inch core bit or not?
You can run a 6 on it. It is a 1.5 kilowatt motor, which is I think 2 horsepower or 1.5. No, it's 2 horsepower. And so you can run a 6, but you can't run it full out. That's what we supply it with. The
videos. He says 5-inch, yet on the website it says up to 6-inch, and I'm going, does it do it or not?
Mark, are you catching that? You need to fix that. The marketing team is like listening, got to true it all up.
Yeah.
Good seeing you, man.
Good to see you too.
Yeah. All right, let's go to more questions. Let me keep going through questions here because we're almost through. So Sandy was asking, is your gearbox the same on the High-Tone 12? I think we answered that. So there's not a gearbox in the High-Tone 12. There's a gear motor on the Model 12.
The High-Tone 12 and the High-Tone 14 are the same. Actually, I run the same gear motor on the High-Tone 10 too. I got everything at the same feed.
It's all the same. Yeah, but it's not a gear like the 14. Bruce had asked, when do I know to clean my centrifuge? Muck a 1/4 inch thick in the centrifuge. I run mine. So when I'm running the Everclean and I'm just hogging stuff here, I'll leave it running pretty much all day, like I'm feeding.
Well, let's put the link to the video up on cleaning your saw with the Everclean.
Yeah, but I need to do the video on the slumping because the real issue you want to pay attention to here, Bruce, if Bruce is on, is when you got that cone of sludge on an Everclean, it's a centrifuge for those that you don't. And it takes dirt or oil, throws it up in there and spins it out. Like you remember the amusement park ride where you lean against the side and then the floor drops and the gravitational force of the spinning keeps you stuck to the side of the ride. It's the same principle. When you turn it off, the risk there is that muck inside there slumps. So now it's no longer balanced. So I tend to clean it more frequently because I want to avoid any kind of vibration that would happen. Because I just use a spatula, like a plastic spatula that I get from like a cake spatula, and I just scrape it out, throw it into a bucket, and it's done. John Beckham, it says, I was late letting in, but I have 3 HP saws, 1 24 and 2 and 4 old ones. How can I clean the covers? How can I clean the covers? 2, 4. I'm not quite sure what that question is. Cleaning the covers.
Well,
if Bruce is here, ask it again. And then Kathy had a question. Is it possible to order new bearings with the center already installed? This was a big problem. Order new bearings with the center already.
Oh, we have a video on putting the bearing in the race, don't we?
We do. But typically when we sell a bearing, it actually comes with the full housing. We don't typically sell a bearing without the housing because most people just want to drop it in. You can, though, for instance, replace just the bearing insert on like a pillow block bearing.
If you've got some of the old HP that had the what were those bearings?
Sealmaster.
Sealmasters in them. In those old Sealmaster bearings, they did this custom base on them, and you can't put a standard bearing in their saw, which I really hated that they did that. But you can change the insert out, and so let's find that change in the bearing insert video and provide it to her.
Okay. And let's see. That was pretty much from last week. We got through all the questions here, so I think we're good.
I am way over time, so I appreciate everybody hanging in there with us and taking the time to be here tonight. But,
give us some good reviews.
Give us reviews and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Subscribe to YouTube.
Helps push it up so more people can see it in Lapidary. We get more people in this hobby.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everybody. And
then Lizelle, you going to jump on and wrap up?
Yes. Thank you very much,
John. Hey, thanks, John. Talk to you later, dude.
All right. See ya.
Thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. What we are doing here is super valuable, and we are getting great feedback from customers and attendees. So we're very grateful for all of you. Again, do not forget to give us a good review on Google. It will really help us a lot. And we are very committed to continue this avenue where we share educational and informational.
Oh, let me pull me up here, guys. So we have take the thing down, and we have next week, we're going to have a really cool program next Friday. One of the participants here, Mr. Chris Stricklet, will be doing a webinar with us, which is going to be covering really good techniques for. There's Chris right there. Holy cow. So Chris has a few saws, and we'll be doing a webinar. We're going to be covering stuff around prepping for flint knapping. Chris does a lot of flint knapping. Some of you also know Roy Miller. Chris and Roy are friends, both Ohio boys. And so we're going to be doing a piece on prepping for the slab, and we're actually going to be laying out the content on Sunday for that. So there'll be some videos. He'll be showing stuff in there, and then we'll be talking as well. So this is also really going to be a great session for learning new techniques. And we're also want to be inviting more people out. We sell a lot of equipment to flint knappers throughout, especially the Southeast and the Southwest. So we want to also get them more exposure to here as well. So definitely plan for that next week. It's going to be super cool. Chris is a serious production guy, so it'll be a real good conversation to have. So so that's coming up next week as well.
That's awesome.
On the review authors pad, there's a link. You can see, put the link up there for the how to do a Google review. Yeah, right there. If you click that link, then you can go in there and say, hey, great education, whatever. These dudes rock, 5 stars. We like 5 stars. It makes us very happy. Anything else to wrap here, Lizelle?
Yep. Thank you so much. So again, we're very committed to continue this avenue where we share education and information with everyone in the lapidary art. Our support does not end at the moment your package leaves our door. That's where it starts, and we can guarantee that our relationship will last for a long time, just like our machine.
Yeah.
So that being said, thank you so much again for your time, guys. See you next week. Good night.
All right. Thank you much.